Dealing with conflicts can make you feel distracted, anxious, or frustrated. There can be various reasons behind a conflict: misunderstandings, miscommunication, perceived threats, personality clashes, a competitive climate, or different values or belief systems can all contribute to conflict. However, the most serious issue raised by conflicts is not the conflict itself, but rather how it is managed, or in certain cases, not managed at all. As human beings, we always seek pleasure and avoid suffering. As a result, we instinctively avoid dealing with disagreements or disputes. The issue is that avoiding or mishandling disagreements leads to larger issues with long-term effects that can be harmful to our mental health and the effectiveness or productivity of any team or organization. Positive conflict resolution is a talent that can be learned and practiced. One of the most crucial aims of someone involved in a fight is to be heard. The ability to listen and use proper communication techniques determines whether a conflict will be resolved positively or negatively. In this particular course, we will be exploring various methods for increasing the positive effects and decreasing the negative effects of conflict. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell so that you don't miss out on any new updates or video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoy this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to comment on the video for any queries or suggestions and I'll respond to your comments. Hello, my name is Shantanu Rana and I welcome you all to this course on conflict management. I am sure that you must have been a part of some conflict in your life. You can think of some very good examples where you have handled a conflict very positively. And I'm sure you can also think of a lot of examples where you had a conflict and you messed up everything and you did not know how to tackle the situation. No need to worry about anything. In this particular course, we are going to learn how exactly to manage a conflict. What are the skills required for that? Everything we will be covering in this particular course from scratch. We always end up having a conflict. Sometimes it's with our parents, sometimes it's with our bosses, with our friends, or with our siblings. Now, there can be various reasons behind it. Maybe our boss wants us to work more and we are not ready for it. We are not ready to overtime. And there's a conflict between us and our bosses. Sometimes our friends are trying to hide something from us and we do not like it. We get hurt and there's a conflict. It can be as simple as you go to your favorite coffee house and you end up having a wrong order and there's a conflict between you and the waiter. It can be anything and there can be various sources of a conflict and nobody can change that. It's a part of our day-to-day life. Now, the fun part is it depends upon you whether you look at the bright side of conflict or the negative aspects of conflict. Yes, you heard me right. There is a positive side of conflict as well. When we say conflict management, that is nothing but reducing the negative sides of conflict and increasing the positive sides of conflict. So in this particular course, we are going to explore how exactly to reduce the negative aspects and how exactly to increase the positive aspects of conflict. And that's how you tackle a situation or a conflict. So let's move forward and have a look at the agenda first of all and see what all we are going to cover in this course one by one. As you can see on the screen, the first thing that we will be discussing is what exactly is conflict. We will also be discussing what are the different levels of conflict that it can occur at. Because before getting into the depth of how exactly to resolve a conflict or manage a conflict, it is important to understand the definition of conflict. So we'll have a look at that in this particular module. Then we'll see what are the different types of conflict, whether it's constructive, it's destructive, on what basis we are dividing conflict. All those things we will be exploring in this module. Then the effects of conflict, as we already discussed, the positive effects and the negative effects. Then when should you actually intervene in a conflict? That's the first step and the most important step of any conflict resolution process. Whether you should intervene or you should step back? If you want to intervene, at what time you should intervene? Who all are the people that you should include in that intervention? All those questions you have to ask yourself before you intervene. Now, how do you tackle that? We will be exploring. Then some important conflict resolution skills. Now, a conflict can be between you and some other person, some other group, or it can be between you, or it can be between two separate parties where you are a mediator. There can be various examples for that. Various situations can arise. Now, how exactly you tackle those situations and what are the skills required to resolve that conflict? That's what we will be exploring in this module. Then we'll look at the causes of conflict. Before trying to resolve a conflict or resolve any problem in the world, the first step is to find out the source of that problem. What is the cause of that conflict? And then we'll see how exactly we can resolve that. Then we will be discussing 5 different approaches to conflict management and what are the steps involved in those approaches. Then the last point is effective ways to reduce destructive conflict. Having a conflict and being able to resolve it is good. But what if you can avoid that destructive part of conflict? That's the best. So at the end of this course, we'll be seeing how exactly we can prevent the negative aspects of conflict, and we can just look at the bright side of it, and we can increase the positive aspects of conflict. All of these things we are going to explore in this particular course in much more detail. So let's move forward and try to understand all of these topics one by one. All right. Now let's try to figure out what exactly is conflict. So before we get into the depth of what are the important skills that we need to learn before resolving a conflict and what are the approaches to resolve a conflict, the first thing that we should pay attention to is what exactly is conflict? How does it arise? What are the different levels it can occur at? All those things we'll be looking at in this particular module. As you can see on the screen, that conflict is nothing but a disagreement between people or group. It can arise whenever individuals have dissimilarity in their interests, thought processes, requirements, and are unable to find a middle way. We all know that conflict is a part of our day-to-day life. We end up having so many conflicts due to so many reasons. For example, let's say we have a lot of conflicts with our parents, and the main reason behind that conflict is the age gap or the generational gap. We try to say something in a certain way, they take it in a certain way, and then they try to explain their situation to us, and we just can't get it. And there's a conflict between us as their children and them as our parents. And you can also think of a lot of other examples where you end up having a conflict with your friends or with your siblings or anybody. It can be at your workplace as well. Now, there can be various reasons. The main thing is we all are different. Our belief system is different. Our upbringing is different. There are certain things that you believe in. There is a belief system that you have. You have your own thought process. The way you work, that is different. And the way I work is different. So we all have our own thought processes, our own belief systems, our own requirements. And according to that, our personality develops. We behave. So because of the dissimilarity between our thought processes and our personalities, we have these conflicts. We do not know how exactly to communicate that particular part about our personality to somebody else. And that's the main source of the conflict. Generally, with our parents, the main source, as I told you, is age gap, generational gap. And there can be various thousands of reasons that are there behind a conflict. Now, a conflict can occur at so many different levels, but we have categorized it into 4 different levels. As you can see on the screen, the first is intrapersonal level. Intrapersonal as in within a person. For example, there's one person, he just completed his high school and he wants to go for college. And he's confused whether to go for ABC college or whether to go for XYZ college. That's a conflict within that person. That's an example of an intrapersonal conflict. Now, conflict can be interpersonal as well. That is between two or more than two members, two people. For example, one person having a conflict with some other person because of some requirements or because of some belief system. Let's say the person number one wants to manage a team and the person 2 also wants to manage the same team, and they are having a conflict trying to prove each other who is the best rather than finding a middle way. That's a conflict between two or more than two people, example of interpersonal conflict. Now it can be intra-group as well, that within a group, two or more than two people having a conflict. For example, let's say there's an organization, and within the sales team of that organization, two members or three members are having a conflict. That is within the same group, they are having a conflict, so that will be intra-group conflict. It can be intergroup also, that within two separate groups, people are having conflict. Now, it can occur at various levels and due to various reasons. But the main basic funda is the clash of interests. We all have different interests, different requirements, and because of which these conflict occurs. All right. So now that we have understood that what exactly is conflict and what are the different levels that it can occur at, let's move forward and try to understand what are the different types of conflict. So as we have already discussed that a conflict can have a positive outcome or a negative outcome. It completely depends upon us how we approach it. So if a conflict is approached positively, the results or the outcome is going to be constructive. But if on the other hand a conflict is approached negatively, then the outcome is going to be destructive. That is a negative outcome. So on the basis of the outcome of the conflict, we can divide conflict into two types. As you can see on the screen that a conflict can be divided into two types, that is constructive conflict and destructive conflict based upon the outcome of the conflict. So a constructive conflict leads to a positive outcome and promotes creativity and innovation. But a destructive conflict leads to a negative outcome, and in such conflicts, the focus is on personalities and not on the issues. So if a conflict is approached negatively, it can lead to harassment, maybe discrimination, and so many other negative outcomes. So that's nothing but destructive conflict. But if due to a conflict, there's team harmony, there's creativity or innovation, that's nothing but constructive conflict. Now there's a very simple funda that whenever there's a conflict, if you try to focus on the personalities or the people involved, it is going to be a negative conflict. That is a destructive conflict. But on the other hand, if you do not focus on the people or the groups involved or the personalities of the people who are involved, and you focus on the issue, the actual dispute, or the sources behind that conflict, then the outcome is going to be positive and it's going to be a constructive conflict. All right. So now that we have understood what exactly is conflict and what are the different types of conflict, let's move forward and try to understand what are the different effects of conflict. So as we have already discussed that if a conflict is approached positively, then the effects are going to be positive, constructive conflict. But if a conflict is approached negatively, then the effects are also going to be negative. That is your destructive effects basically. So we have seen that there are basically two possible outcomes of any conflict. Either the outcome is going to be positive or it is going to be negative. So in this particular module, we'll find out what are those positive and negative effects of conflict. As you can see on the screen, that the positive effects of conflict are better decision making, diverse ideas, team harmony, better individual performance, and identification of new members. Because when we say that a conflict is approached positively, it is always about finding some common interests. Let's say there's a conflict between two members or three members or two or more groups. It will always be about finding some common interest. There's always some why do we want something behind what we want. We want something, but there's always some goal behind it, some intention behind it. And a positive approach to resolve a conflict is always about finding that common goal, finding those common interests. And if we try to find out those common interests, the overall outcome is going to be positive eventually. So better decision making will be there, ideas will be more diverse because more and more people will be there. They have different backgrounds, different thought processes, and when they come on the same platform, the ideas are going to be diversified, which will help the organization and their individual goals as well. And overall team harmony will be maintained and better individual performance and overall better organization performance will be there. And there will be some identification of new members as well, because people who do not step up will also step up seeing the positive approach. But on the other hand, the negative effects of conflict are mental concerns, violence, decrease in productivity, job dissatisfaction, and absent-mindedness. Because if there's a conflict and we cannot find a middle way, we cannot find some common goals, overall experience is going to be very negative. It will increase the stress levels among the employees or people who are involved in it. Overall mental concerns will be more, because people who are approaching it negatively will be involved in a lot of unproductive work. Overall they'll be absent minded. Their energy, which is supposed to go in some productive work, will go in resolving a conflict to which they are not even able to find a solution. They're not able to resolve it. So overall stress will be more, and environment will be very unhappy. There can be cases of violence as well as a effect of conflict, which is definitely a negative effect. It can be discrimination, harassment as well. So it completely depends upon you how you approach a conflict. Now, positive effects can be there, negative effects can be there. It's not the conflict which is bad, it's your approach which is bad. Always remember this thing. When I say the word conflict, I know a lot of you will be getting these pictures of one team trying to dominate the other team, people fighting, or there's an issue. But conflict is not about all that. There's a bright side of conflict as well. Now, in this particular course, our main aim is to look at that bright side and see how exactly we can increase the positive effects of conflict. Now, in the next slide, I am going to show you some very important points that you should always remember before you try to resolve a conflict. The first point is that conflict is inevitable, but it does not necessarily have to be destructive. We have already seen it that it depends upon us. The effects can be constructive or can be destructive. Conflict is a part of our day-to-day life. We cannot really prevent it. If you think that you will have a kind of environment where we can simply prevent conflict, that may not work. There are very less chances that it will work, because we all have different interests, different processes, and when we come on the same platform, there's always going to be some dispute, some conflict. So it's inevitable. We can't change that. What we can do is we can approach it positively so that the overall experience is not unhappiness. The overall experience should be constructive. There should be some positive outcome out of it. The second point is the problem is not that the conflict exists, but how you choose to handle it. The same point as I discussed. When approached positively, conflict promotes diverse ideas, team harmony, and whatnot. It's beautiful if you look at it positively, and it's the worst if you look at it negatively. Depends on us. Conflict management is the process of reducing the negative effects of conflict and increasing the positive effects of conflict. The name of this course is conflict management. That's nothing. We have the positive effects of conflict. We have the negative effects of conflict. The process of increasing the positive effects and decreasing the negative effects is called conflict management. That's how you manage a conflict. All right. So now that we have understood what exactly are the different effects of conflict, let's try to understand the concept of intervention in a conflict. So intervention in a conflict is extremely important when it comes to resolving a conflict. In fact, this is the first step, or that's what you have to look at the very first place when you try to resolve a conflict. Because if you intervene at a wrong time, the conflict is going to be worse and you are never going to resolve it. So you have to make sure that you intervene at the right time, at the right place, and make sure that you are going to make the situation better and not worse. So as you can see on the screen, that it can be very tempting to get involved in a dispute. But knowing when to intervene in a conflict is the first step of conflict management process. When you want to resolve a conflict, you do not want to increase the dispute. You do not want to worse the situation. You want to make it better. For that, even if it is tempting, you should know and ask yourself this question, that is it important for you to intervene? Can the two separate parties resolve the conflict on their own? You have to ask yourself these questions, and then only you'll be able to figure out whether you are supposed to intervene or not. Generally, you should intervene if the workplace is being disrupted, if the productivity is being affected, or if there is any threat that is being posed to the employees. If any one of these three situations occur, definitely you are supposed to intervene. Other than these situations, if there is any random situation, you always have to ask yourself certain questions and you always have to analyze the situation to make sure whether you should intervene or not. Always remember the 5 W's of intervention. When, that is when to intervene. Timing is extremely crucial when it comes to intervention. Why? Why are you supposed to intervene? Why can't they resolve it on their own? And why just you? Why can't somebody else be the mediator? Or why can't somebody else resolve the conflict being a third party? Why is it important for you to resolve the conflict? Ask yourself these questions before you actually try to resolve a conflict. Then where? At what place? And at what time? What exactly are those parties which are involved? What exactly are those people who are involved in this particular conflict? Who? Who all you can include as mediators to resolve this conflict? So all these 5 W's of intervention, these questions you have to ask yourself in order to be able to resolve a conflict positively. Because if, let's say, there's a conflict between two members and you come there as a mediator, you want to resolve the conflict, but you intervene at a wrong time. Now it will become a conflict between three members, those two and you. That is nothing but increasing the worst part or the negative effects of conflict, which is not something that we want. So to make sure that you make the situation better and do not increase it or make it worse, you have to understand that timing is extremely crucial when it comes to resolving a conflict. All right. So now that we have understood the concept of intervention in a conflict, let's move forward and try to understand that what are the important skills that are required in order to be able to resolve a conflict positively. So whenever there's a conflict, now this conflict can be between you and some other party, or it can be between two separate parties where you are a mediator. How do you resolve this conflict? What are the skills that are required by you in order to be able to resolve this conflict constructively? That's what we are going to explore in this particular module. As you can see on the screen, that the first point, the first skill that is required by you is active listening. You always have to listen to the other party. If it's a conflict between you and some other person or some other group, go to that other group, ask them that why did they do something in the way they did, or why are they going to do something in the way they are planning. Ask them what exactly is the reason behind it. Get to know their common interest, their common goals, and then try to figure out, then try to set some rules and try to talk to them in that way. But listening is the first step. You always have to listen to the other party's story. You always have to get to know what they have to say. Then second point is open communication. You always have to communicate. If there's an issue at a particular point of time, communicate at the same time rather than avoiding it. Because if you'll keep avoiding, at one point of time, all these issues will pile up and then it will become a much bigger conflict that you won't be able to resolve probably. So make sure you keep the communication open. You always tell how you feel and what are the facts like. Always talk in terms of feelings and facts. Always communicate. Then patience. Patience is extremely important when it comes to resolving a conflict because sometimes the conflict resolution process can take a lot of time and a lot of energy as well. But you have to be patient because if you resolve a conflict, it is going to help you and the organization that you are a part of. So be patient and understand the concept of actual conflict resolution. That if you are going to resolve it, it's going to be beneficial for you in the long term. Then the last point is empathy. You have to be empathetic when it comes to resolving a conflict. Try to put yourself into the shoes of other persons, their emotions, and try to understand how they are feeling. When you say something, you always try to take things in a way that you have said it, but now you have to listen to the other party also. Try to understand them, see how they must have felt, and then try to resolve the conflict. So these are four very important skills that you should possess or try to possess in order to be able to resolve a conflict effectively. Now, let me give you some tips and tricks on that, be it a conflict between you and some other party, or be it a conflict between two separate parties. These tips and tricks will always be useful for you. The first one is use yes and statements. Rather than saying I disagree with you or I do not agree with you, you can use things like yes and. Because if there's a conflict, the other party maybe is already angry at you. They already are feeling that you are not understanding them. And then on that, if you'll say something such as I disagree or I do not agree with you, it can worsen the situation. And that is not something which we want. So to make sure that you be very polite, you keep your tone very calm, and you use statements such as yes and what I feel is, like that. The second point is seek to understand before being understood. As human beings, we expect a lot from other human beings. We expect that they'll understand us, but at the same time we forget that the other party is also expecting that we will be able to understand them. So realize this thing and try to understand the other party too. Focus on issues at hand and not on personalities or past disputes. Never make personal comments and never focus on the issues that have occurred in the past. Talk about the issue that is happening right now. Talk about only the issue and not the personalities or the groups or the personalities of the people who are involved in the dispute. Then maintain a calm tone, that's extremely important, and show willingness to collaborate. If you show willingness to collaborate, it's always going to be a positive outcome at the end. Because whatever thoughts you have, whatever words you choose to say something, it always comes from your core. And if in your core you are willing to collaborate, it will reflect in your words and in your thoughts. And that will make the other party feel that you are trying to understand them. And eventually you will be able to resolve a conflict. All right. So now that we have understood that the first step of conflict resolution process is to understand whether you are supposed to intervene or not. So if you realize that you are actually supposed to intervene in a particular situation, then the first thing that you should pay attention to is the reasons or the causes of conflict. If you know that you have to resolve a particular conflict, the first step is to make sure that you understand what are the sources behind that particular dispute. As you can see on the screen, that understanding the causes can create a more productive approach to conflict management. Let me explain this to you with the help of a very simple example. Let's say you have fever, so you will decide to go to the doctor. Now the doctor will try to figure out what exactly is the cause of that fever. Is it some kind of viral, some vaccination because of some infection? He'll have a lot of causes, then he'll see what exactly is the cause of your fever, and seeing that, he'll suggest you some medicine. Once you'll take the medicine, you'll be fine. Same is the case with conflict. Whenever there's some kind of disruption at the workplace or some kind of negative environment, you see that there's some kind of conflict going on. Then you have to figure out what exactly is the cause of that conflict. Once you'll see the cause, then you'll make a proper approach and you'll see how exactly you can manage it properly, and then the outcome will be positive. So the first step to resolve any problem, be it your fever in the real world or be it your conflict in your personal life or in your organization, the first step is to make sure that you understand the source of the problem, the actual issue and the reason behind it. So generally there are two types of causes: interpersonal causes or your task system causes, which are generally in your organization, in your company. So if you see the interpersonal causes, the first one is age or generational difference. Definitely it can be a cause for conflict. Generally whatever conflicts we have with our parents, those are because of the age gap or the generation gap. Second is different priorities. We have different priorities, you have different priorities. As human beings, we all are unique and we have our own priorities. We like something, we dislike something. And when we come on the same platform, there are chances that because of dissimilarity in our priorities, there can be some kind of conflict. Let's say you are a very people oriented person and I am a very task oriented person. If we come on the same platform, there can be issues because of that. Then different core values and belief system can also be a cause. Differences between the personalities of the people who are involved. Let's say you are doing a project and different kinds of people are there. Because they have different belief system, different core values, different interests, there can be some conflict. Lack of cooperation. Some people work best alone. They do not know how to work with a team. There's a lack of cooperation. That can also be one of the causes, which is interpersonal causes for conflict. Then work style differences. Some people work in a certain way. They are not very organized, let's say. They are not very punctual. But some people are very punctual, very organized. They both are good. If they meet the deadline, they work properly. But their way of working is very, very different. Some people have a proper routine, very planned routine. Some people like it to be very flexible. The routine has to be flexible. We all have our own work styles. And when we come on the same platform and try to work on something where we have similar goals, then we can have some conflicts because of these things. Then false assumptions. Sometimes we assume certain things and we think that that is correct. And that can also be one of the causes for conflict. It can also be cultural differences. If we work with international clients, you must have seen that. Task system causes. First one is unclear organization structure. That is one of the most common causes in the organizations for any conflict. Because if the unclear structure is there, then you'll never be able to figure out whom to report to, if there's any issue, whom to go to, and this will create a lot of problem at the workplace. Then unclear roles, if you do not know what exactly you are supposed to do, that is also an issue, can also be a cause for conflict. Undefined goals, you are not sure what exactly are your objectives, whether your objectives are aligned with the objectives of the organization or not. You will never be clear about anything and you will work and you will feel unproductive. And that is also a reason for the cause of conflict. Then unrealistic expectation. If somebody will give you unrealistic expectation, you'll feel that the other person is not empathizing with you. They are not trying to understand you. And that can also be one of the very, very good reason for a conflict. Then competition for scarce resources. If there is any lack of resource, that can also be a create a competition feeling between the same team members or between two groups of a same organization. And that can also be a cause for a conflict. All right. So now that we have understood that it is extremely important to know what are the causes or sources of conflict before we actually try to resolve it, it's time for us to move forward and look at what are the different approaches to actually resolve a conflict. But before we get into the process of resolving a conflict, let's first try to understand what exactly is conflict management. As we have already seen, that there are two effects that a conflict can have: positive effects, that is constructive, or negative effects, that is destructive. Now, the process of increasing the positive effects of conflict and decreasing the negative effects of conflict is known as conflict management. So, whenever you say that you are going to manage a conflict, that simply means that you are going to work on an approach where you will be trying to increase the positive effects and decrease the negative aspects of conflict. So let's move forward and try to understand what are those five approaches, and we will be looking at each and every approach in much more detail. We'll also be covering the advantages and disadvantages of each and every approach. As you can see on the screen, that the five approaches for conflict management are accommodation, collaboration, competition, avoidance, and compromise. When we say collaboration, that's a win-win situation. That is, you as one of the parties and the other party, you both will feel as if you have won. So it's one of the most ideal approaches to resolve any conflict. Then competition, where you will win but the other party will lose. Here generally one party will be very forceful for the other party to make sure that they lose. So you are going to win as one of the parties, but the other party is going to lose. So it's a win-lose situation. Then avoidance. If you avoid a conflict, it is going to pile up and is going to become a bigger conflict in future. So it's a lose-lose situation. You are not going to win and even the other party is not going to win. Then accommodation. It's a lose-win situation. Here one of the parties as a good gesture will tell you to win. They'll be okay with you winning and them losing. So it's a lose-win situation where you'll lose and the other party will win. Then in the middle of all this, there's one approach called compromise, where you will compromise on certain factors and the other party will also compromise on certain factors. So it's a win some and lose some situation. You'll also win some part and you'll also lose some part. Same goes for the other party. So these are the 5 approaches. Now let's discuss each approach in much more detail. So the first approach is collaboration. It's also called collaborative approach. In this approach, both the parties work together to create a collaborative solution. Let's say there's a conflict between two people. Now, if we try to find out some common interests, what are the common goals that both of them are having, then it can become a collaborative approach where both the parties will feel good and both the parties will win eventually. As you see, the major advantages of this approach are leads to a win-win outcome. Both the parties are going to win. They'll feel that they matter. So that's one of the major advantages. Then builds mutual trust and respect. Since no one is losing and both of them are feeling superior and confident, so they will build that mutual trust and therefore overall team harmony will be maintained. It leads to solving the roots of the problem. Since we are getting into the depth of it, understanding the causes, then finding the common goals, so it will completely resolve the problem. It will completely resolve the causes or the roots of the problem. And in future, there won't be any issue related to this existing conflict. But the major disadvantages are it requires more effort and time than any other approach. Since we are trying to resolve the root of the problem, we need to get into the depth and it will take a lot of energy and a lot of time. Requires a commitment from all the parties. If one party is ready to or willing to collaborate, but the other party is not, then it is never going to work. In this particular approach, both the parties have to be willing to collaborate. They have to be able to find out certain common goals and then they'll be able to find a common ground where they can build a foundation. That's how it actually works. So it's one of the most ideal approaches to resolve any conflict, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of efforts. Let's move forward and try to understand what exactly is compromise approach. So in this approach, both the parties make some concessions. You are going to compromise on certain factors and I am going to compromise on certain factors. So I am going to win some part and lose some part, and same goes for you. You are also going to win some part and lose some part. So the major advantage is that fast approach to resolve a conflict. The approach is very fast as compared to collaborative approach. It's much faster, lowers the stress level in both the parties. Since it is equal, it's not like one party is winning and the other is losing. So the stress level is going to be less, mental concerns are going to be less. Disadvantages main cause dissatisfaction to both the parties and not a very good solution for long term. Since we are compromising on certain factors, we are not getting into the depth of the conflict. We are not trying to find out the root of the conflict. And since we are not resolving the root of the conflict, it can again appear in some other situation in future. And it's not a very good approach because both the parties can be dissatisfied at times because they are losing on something as well. Since both the parties are losing on something, there can be situation where both the parties will feel as if they have lost, even if they are winning some part. So it can cause dissatisfaction. Now the next approach is competition. So in this approach, one party uses force to resolve the dispute. It's very simple to understand. There are two parties, one group and one person, or two groups or two people. It can be any situation. If one person is trying to force the other party, the other person to lose, and they are going to win as a return of that, that is competition approach. You compete with the other party. The main advantage is that can provide very fast resolution to any conflict. If you are going to force the other party, definitely you are going to win and it is going to be very fast approach. But the main disadvantage is that it affects the relationship very negatively with the opponent party. and it can be very stressful and exhausting, because being forceful in a conflict is not a very good idea, and the other party is not going to lose very simply. It is going to be very stressful. There will be a lot of anxiety, and eventually if you win also by competition approach, the other party will never be able to build that trust with you. If you work in the same organization, it's a very bad point for a long run. Then the next approach is accommodation. So in this approach, one party consents as a gesture of goodwill. So they will be like, we are okay to lose, you win. As a good gesture, they'll tell the other party to win. Now the major advantage is, just like competition approach, since one party is completely losing and the other party is winning, it's going to be very fast. Very less efforts will be required. But it gives a chance to both the parties to evaluate the situation again. Since one party is being very nice and they are telling the other party to win simply, it will give both the parties some blank space to go back and try to think about the situation again. And maybe they can come up with some better solutions. So that's one of the advantages, that it leaves some blank space where both the parties can work on. And it can eventually become a collaborative approach as well, which is one of the most ideal ones. But the major disadvantage in this particular approach is that it can affect the self-esteem of one party very negatively. Since one party as a good gesture is telling the other party to win, but at the same time they may feel very inferior as compared to the other party, which is not a very good example or a very good solution to resolve a conflict. Now, the next approach is avoidance. So, in this approach, either party avoids the issue, which is never a very good solution, because if you avoid an issue, it is going to come back in future. It will pile up, will become bigger and worse, and will come back. So, the major advantage is there's no stress and it's very quick, because it's not actually a resolution process, it's avoidance. You are just avoiding it. Gives you time to analyze the situation and collect more information before you act. But you can, again, this situation will be applicable to cases where you have a very important project at hand, or you are working on something which is extremely important and you cannot pay attention to any kind of conflict. So at a particular time you can avoid it, and then later on you can come back, and in that meantime both the parties will get some time to think about the situation, think about the sources of the problem. The major disadvantage is that it can affect the relationship negatively when the other party expects action. Since it is avoidance, maybe one party is not ready to take any action, but they will expect from the other party to take some action and resolve it. And if the other party will not do that, there will be this negative energy between both the parties, which is not a very good solution and not good at all if both the parties are a part of same organization. And this approach is limited to short conflict. If the conflict is very big, we can never ignore it. We cannot avoid it or prevent it. We have to sit and we have to find some common goals, or we have to use some approach to resolve it. So all the conflicts cannot be avoided. This technique can only be used when we have a major project which is very important at the time and the conflict is very short. So these are the 5 main approaches. All right. So now we know that there are 5 different approaches to resolve a conflict. It can be a collaborative approach, compromise, competition, accommodation, or avoidance. Now it's time for us to move forward and try to understand that what are the steps involved in a collaborative approach. So as you can see on the screen, that every conflict is unique. So there's no one size fits all approach to handling them all. There are several aspects that go into determining which strategy is ideal for settling the conflict. Before picking which one to employ, think about them all. Let me explain this to you with the help of an example. Let's say there's a situation where we have very important deliverables. We have a very important project going on, and at the same time, there's some conflict between two members of the team, and it's a very small conflict. Do we need to use the collaborative approach? Actually, no, we can simply go with the avoidance approach, because we have very important deliverables, we have a project coming up. So at that time, since it's a small conflict, we can just ignore it, we can avoid it. And once the deliverables are done, the deadlines are met, then we can come back to the situation and analyze it and maybe go forward with that. So it completely depends upon the situation that you are in, people who are involved in the conflict. It depends upon a lot of factors which determines that which approach will be the best one to resolve a particular conflict or a dispute. Now, the best case scenario is obviously a win-win situation, but it can also be the most difficult to achieve. Before you actually employ a particular approach to resolve a conflict, think about the advantages and the disadvantages of that particular approach. We know that collaborative approach leads to a win-win situation, but at the same time, it is very, very complex because in this particular approach, we have to get into the depth of the problem. We have to understand the common goals. We have to understand the root of the problem. So it's about resolving the actual root, actual cause of the problem, which takes a lot of efforts and a lot of energy. So it is a win-win situation, but again, it's very complex in nature. Now, there are three main things that you need to remember in a collaborative approach. Step number one is you have to use your active listening skills. You have to listen. Let's say you are a mediator between two parties which are having conflict. There's person one, there's person two, they both are having a conflict, and you want to resolve it as a third person, as a mediator. Then, first thing that you should do is you need to listen to them, get to know their story, ask them certain questions, collect a lot of data. Once the data is collected, you have heard their side of story, then you analyze it. See what exactly is the root of the problem. See why is it happening? Are there chances that it can become a worse problem in the future? Analyze it properly. Once you have done your analysis, then guide the parties toward a collaborative solution. Make a basic ground, set some ground rules, and tell them what they are supposed to look at. That is common goals. You have to find out the common goals and you will be able to resolve a conflict. So three simple steps in collaborative approach are: first of all, you have to listen to both the parties. Then whatever they say, you have to analyze that, and then accordingly, you have to guide them and tell them how they can actually have a collaborative ground, how they can actually approach it in a very positive way. So in a collaborative approach, so first step, as I told you, is listening to the other parties. By listening, what we do is collection of information or collection of data. We'll collect all the information, then we'll guide both the parties to move from their positions to interest. I will be explaining what exactly is position, what is interest, and how you make both the parties to move from their positions to interest. Once we have collaborated and we have found out the common goals, then those interests, those common interests will be the new problems and not the position. Let me explain this to you in detail and you will be able to understand it. So in the collaborative approach, if there's a conflict between two parties and you are a mediator, first step is go to both the parties, take their interview, listen to them, hear their story, and ask them actual questions that will help you in analyzing. You can ask them who are the groups involved. Listen to them, listen to their story rather than pre-assumption. Ask them each and everything. Is there any past history involved? How did the conflict arise? What are the core issues? Are the issues negotiable? Are there any common interests? Are any values challenged? If there's any belief system, any value that is challenged, ask them each and everything. If there are two parties, first go to the first party, ask them, listen to their story. Then go to the second party, ask them and listen to their story. Now you know their story, now you know what exactly is the issue that the first party is having, and you also know what is the issue that the second party is having. Now, once the facts are collected, establish a collaborative stage. Ask them about common interest and build a story around it. Set some ground rules and create an agenda for the meeting. So first step, you have taken a meeting with both the parties separately. Now it's time for you to call both the parties at the same place so that you three, that is both the parties which are having conflict and you as a mediator, can have a meeting. But before a meeting, make sure that the place you choose for the meeting should be neutral, the timing should be neutral, and also you should always tell them the agenda of the meeting. Tell them why we are having this meeting. Tell them that since you guys are having a conflict, it is your duty at the workplace to resolve it. For that, we are having this meeting. Set some ground rules as well. Tell them that nobody should make any personal comments. Tell them that we are supposed to talk in a calm tone. And it depends upon the situation. Depending upon the situation, people involved, the type of conflict, the cause behind the conflict, set some ground rules, take a neutral place, take a neutral timing, and call them for a meeting. You have the entire data. Now it's time for you to analyze it. Now, once you have collected the entire data and you are going to meet both the parties at a same place for the meeting, you have to make sure that you make both the parties move from their positions to interests. Position is the demand you make on someone else. This is what you want. Interests are the needs justifying the positions. These are the reason you want something. Let me give you an example. Let's say there's a project and a team for that project is there. In that team, there's person one who wants to lead that project, and there's person two who also wants to lead that project. And the person one and person two are having a conflict. They are trying to prove to each other that why they are the best and how they can lead the project. And they are having a conflict. Now, the main thing is very, very simple. Person one wants to lead the project, person two wants to lead the project. They both want to do the same thing. But in this process, rather than communicating their actual interests, their goals, what they are doing is they are fighting with each other. They are telling each other that why they are best and why the other party is not the best for this particular project. They are criticizing each other, which is leading to a very bad conflict. Now, how will you resolve it as a mediator? So the fact that they want this position, they want to lead the project, is nothing but a position. But why do they want it is the interest. Let's say you go to the person one and ask him, why do you want to lead the project? He'll tell you that he feels very less confident in the organization. And so to feel very superior or to feel very confident in the organization, he wants to lead the project. He likes to lead people. People management is his skill. And then you go to the second person and ask him why he wants to lead the project. And let's say he tells you that the area of the project is completely aligned with his personal goals, his career goals. So this project will help him, his profile building. So both of them have their reasons. Now the reasons behind that particular position is interest. Person one wants to lead the project. That's the position. But why he wants it is the interest behind that particular position. Now, once you have completed the groundwork and both the parties have come to the table, then your goal is to guide the parties away from their positions and get them to focus on the underlying interests. You do not have to worry about the positions once you are meeting at a place. Once simultaneous meeting is happening, you don't have to worry at all about what they want. You have to worry about the fact why do they want something. You have to put the attention, put light on the interests and not on the position. That's your goal as a mediator. First you collect the information, then you have a meeting with both the parties at the same place, a neutral place, and you guide both the parties to make sure that they move from their positions to their interest. So the third and the final step in the collaborative approach is that whatever interests that you have figured out from those positions, now you have to portray those interests as the new problems. Forget about the positions and make these common interests as the new problems. Party 1 is having some interest behind the position. Party 2 is also having some interests behind the position. Now, out of those interests, what are some common interests? What are some common goals? You have to figure out those common goals and you have to encourage the involved parties to come up with creative ideas that satisfy as many combined interests as possible. You have to come up with several options and then establish which option will make the best solution. Let me give you the previous example. There were two parties, they both wanted to lead the project. Now, what we can do is we can tell the party 1 to lead some part of the project, and we can also tell the party 2 to lead some part of the project. So they both will be leaders of that particular project, and it will be a win-win situation. They got what they wanted. They wanted to lead the project, they both will be leading the project together. So that's one of the solutions. I'm not saying that this is one of the best solutions. It completely depends upon the situation. Maybe those people do not have the required skills to lead the project. But it is a hypothetical situation. Now, just like this, there can be various other solutions as well. So first of all, you have to make a lot of solutions like this, and then you have to see which one will be the best solution as per the situation. It completely depends upon the situation, people involved, and the organization that they are a part of. But as a mediator between two separate parties that are having conflicts, there are some don'ts that you have to always keep in your mind. Number one, a tendency to judge and prematurely reject an idea. Never reject any idea when you are a mediator. Because whatever they have to say, you have to listen. You have to try to understand them. What is obvious for you may not be obvious for them. What you think is very basic may be a big deal for them. So never reject any idea, listen to them carefully, and actually listen to them to understand them. Second point is trying to find the single best solution. Whenever you are going for a collaborative approach, it's never about finding the single best solution. There can be various solutions, and some part of each and every solution we can use to find out the most optimal solution at the end. The main reason is to make sure that both the parties are feeling confident, both the parties are feeling as if they have won. That's the main idea behind a collaborative approach. First of all, you collect the data, collect the entire information separately from both the parties. Then you meet both the parties at a neutral place at a neutral time. Then you make them move from their positions to their interest, and then you establish those interests as the new problems. That's how you resolve a problem using the collaborative approach. All right. So now that we have understood that what are the different approaches to resolve a particular conflict, and we have also seen the steps involved in a collaborative approach, it's time for us to move forward and try to understand that what are some of the effective ways to reduce a destructive conflict or the negative aspects of conflict. So these are some of the very important points that I'll be discussing in this particular module in order to be able to reduce the destructive part or the negative effects of a particular dispute. So number one is communicate. You always have to communicate how you're feeling about a particular subject. That is in the organization or at a workplace or at your family. It can be any event, any situation. Communication is the key. Whenever there's an issue, be it small or a large issue, make sure you communicate. Because when you communicate, you are able to deliver your intentions to the opponent party and you are understanding them at the same time. Sometimes you can have a pre-assumption or maybe it's simply a misunderstanding. So all of these things gets cleared in the communication part. Number two is stop avoiding it. Never try to avoid a conflict, because when you avoid a conflict or these small conflicts, it piles up and it becomes a bigger problem in the future. And for the long run, it's not good. Then set a formal complaint process. If you are at any managerial role in any organization, make sure you set up a formal complaint process for your employees or the team. Then create an environment that promotes collaboration. Collaboration is always good. Nobody will feel superior, nobody will feel inferior. Everyone will be at the same level and they'll work as a team. That's the best environment that you should try to create in any organization, workplace, or be it at your family as well. Then ensure everyone is treated fairly. There should not be any discrimination and everyone should be treated fairly in order to make sure that there are no negative effects of any conflict that will occur or has occurred in the past. Then listen to understand. Active listening is one of the most important skills. If you listen just for the sake of listening, the other party will always get to know. But if you listen to actually understand them, that's what is required in order to be able to reduce the negative conflict. Because if you listen to people, they'll be able to communicate, and eventually there won't be any misunderstandings or pre-assumptions about anything. Then set clear expectations. You should always make sure what are the roles and responsibilities of people, what they are supposed to do, whom they are supposed to report to, what are your expectations out of them. If you have clear expectations, there's not going to be any mismatch, and overall conflicts which have negative effects will be reduced. All right. So now that you have reached the summary part of this course, I am sure that you have actually understood that what exactly is conflict and what are the different ways or approaches by which you can manage a particular conflict. In this particular course, we started with the definition of conflict and looked at the various levels that it can occur at. It can be intrapersonal, interpersonal, intragroup, or intergroup. We also looked at the different types of conflict, such as constructive conflict and destructive conflict. It completely depends upon us how we choose to manage a conflict. If we manage a conflict positively, the effects are going to be positive, which is called constructive conflict. But if we choose to manage it negatively and we do not know how to find a middle way between both the parties which are involved in the conflict, then the effects are going to be negative, and that is called your destructive conflict. It is our choice. Conflict is inevitable. Nobody can change that or prevent that. It has always been a part of nature and it will always be a part of human life. We cannot change it. All we can do is we can learn the skill to manage a conflict positively. In this particular course, we have looked at 5 different approaches to manage a conflict. We have looked at the collaboration approach, which is a win-win situation, compromise approach, which is a win-some, lose-some situation, avoidance approach, which is a lose-lose situation, competition approach, which is a win-lose situation, and accommodation approach, which is a lose-win situation. Depending upon the situation, you can choose any of these approaches and use it. You always have to make sure that you look at the advantages and disadvantages of each and every approach, and that then employ one of these approaches to resolve a particular conflict. We have also looked at the various steps that are involved in the collaborative or the win-win approach. The first step is to listen to the other party or the opponent party. Collect all the information. Once that is done, then make sure you make both the parties move from their positions to their interests. Position is what you want, and interest is why you want something. Once you have moved them to interest, then establish those interests as the new problems, and you will definitely be able to resolve a particular conflict. So from now onwards, whenever you hear the word conflict, you should not have the pictures of people arguing with each other or group trying to dominate each other. Rather, you should have the picture of diverse ideas and better communication and team harmony, because that's what the bright side of conflict looks like. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell so that you don't miss out on any new updates or video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoy this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing. So make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to comment on the video for any queries or suggestions, and I'll respond to your comments.